There we go. We've got people coming in now, so I'll just give it a couple of minutes while everyone definitely gets into the webinar. Those numbers are slowing now, so we'll be able to get going in a minute, I think. Okay, good afternoon, Pranav Dar. Welcome everyone to today's Shelter Cymru webinar on the Homelessness and Social Housing Allocations Bill. My name is Robin White. I am the Head of Campaigns here at Shelter Cymru, and I'm going to be chairing today's session. I'm joined by a number of my expert colleagues to try and help me go through things today and to, most importantly, try and answer any questions that people have about the new bill, which has, of course, only been out for about 3 or 4 weeks, although it feels much longer than that. Just a quick bit of housekeeping before I let everyone else introduce themselves. So everyone knows, we are recording today's webinar and intend to put it on our YouTube channel. So if people then want to share it with colleagues, please do. We're keen that as many people see it as possible. Given the number of attendees we're expecting today, we're also not going to be calling on people to ask questions themselves, and we're asking people if they can use the Q&A function instead. So hopefully everyone can see that at the bottom of their screens. And if you pop things in there, we will try our best to pick them all up. We've also left the chat function open, I believe. We won't be monitoring that though for questions. That is just in case people want to share thoughts on the bill, any concerns they have. We'll obviously have a look afterwards to see if there's any questions in there, and we might follow up with people. But like I say, we won't be monitoring it throughout. And if anyone wants to put their question in the Q&A in Welsh as well, if that's your preference, please feel free to do that. My colleague Heather is here to translate anything that needs to be translated for us. So I think that's all of my housekeeping. I will then quickly ask my colleagues to just introduce themselves and the bit of Shelter Cymru that they work for before we kick off proper. So Lauren, do you want to go first?
Afternoon all. Hi, I'm Lauren. I am Shelter Cymru's Policy and Public Affairs Manager. I previously supported the peer research team here at Shelter Cymru. I'll pass over to Mark.
Hey everybody, my name is Mark Hodges. I'm the training team manager, that's who I am. And yeah, I'm responsible for the training and events team. You may well have seen me in training sessions or heard my voice on e-learning. And lucky you, here I am again.
And I'm Tom. I'm the senior solicitor here at Shelter Cymru. I've been in post for about a year now. So yeah, still learning the ropes, but yeah, we got a great team within the legal team that sort of sit above the caseworkers here at Shelter Cymru.
I'll just introduce myself quickly. I'm not part of the panel and I will hide my self-view in a minute. Ond os oes unrhyw un ohonoch chi yn dymuno gofyn cwestiwn yn Gymraeg, gnewch hynny drwy gyfrwng y gwes sgwrsio sydd gyda ni, a wedyn na i gyfieithu'ch cwestiwn chi a'i rhoi ger bron y panel sydd gyda ni heddi. Felly croeso i chi wneud unrhyw gyfraniad trwy gyfrwng y Gymraeg. Diolch yn fawr.
Excellent. So just a quick overview of how we're going to try and run this today. So we're going to do a bit of an overview of the bill and what we think some of the key elements of the bill in terms of our work as a provider of advice and support to people facing bad housing and homelessness are. So we'll go around the panel in a minute and do that. But as I've said already, the biggest thing we're trying to do is have a long period of time today for questions. So anyone who thinks that whether it's our solicitors, our legal team, or our policy team might be able to help them with their understanding, that's what we're here for. And thank you very much to everyone who's sent questions over in advance as well. So before I go over to one of my colleagues, though, I just wanted to say that in general, obviously the Homelessness and Social Housing Allocations Bill is a really significant moment for housing and homelessness in Wales. This is a bill that really does have the potential to be to provide some transformative change in our approach to homelessness. But I do think the word potential is one you might hear quite a lot from Shelter Cymru today and in the coming weeks, because we completely recognise that legislative change alone can't end the housing emergency. We also have to ensure that it is followed by the funding, the social homes, everything else needed to implement it, and to make sure that the new rights that we are giving to people are rights that can be realised in practice in the near future. But despite that, we are very positive, because this is a positive piece of legislation in many of the areas that it is changing. Take, for example, the ending of priority need and intentionality, things that Shelter Cymru has campaigned for years, and is incredibly pleased to see legislation proposing to take those away once and for all. And beyond the legislation and its implementation as well, I think we also need to remember that this can be a catalyst for other change. So by introducing the legislation, we put that focus on the need to end the housing emergency. We ensure that all those other aspects that need investment, needs more focus, whether that is, building social homes or tackling some of the problems in our private rented sector that drive people towards homelessness, those get profile as well. We can keep going. The bill is very much the next step on a journey to ending homelessness in Wales. It's not the end destination in of itself. But I will leave it there from me. Actually, no, I won't, because there is one other thing I wanted to say, which is I just want to be very clear that everything we are saying today is Shelter Cymru's understanding of the legislation. It is based on us reading through the guidance, and very much rooted in our experience of working with people facing bad housing and homelessness across Wales. So we can talk to what we think the practical implications of changes proposed in the bill will be. What we can't do is speak to the intent of those changes, because we are not the Welsh Government. We are not the people who have drafted or have taken this bill, or are taking this bill through the Senate. If we get questions where we think that they might be better suited being directed to another place, or where we're not sure of the answer, we're going to hold our hands up and be honest about that, and we will try our best to help direct you to where we think they might be best. But where we can answer questions, and I'd hope that on most of the things that come in we can do that, we will do our absolute best. So that's it from me for a minute. I think I'm going to pass over to Mark next, who's just going to give us that brief overview of the bill and some of the changes that are being proposed.
Yeah, thanks, Robin. Hi, everybody. Yes, I'm also the lucky person who gets to hide behind slides, so bear with me while I just bring those up now. the current slide. So as Robin said, I am going to provide a brief introduction to this bill. I think it's important to highlight really that this isn't sort of a fresh start. It's not like when the Housing Wales Act was introduced where everything changed. What this bill does is it creates significant amendments to existing legislation. So it's not as small as tweaks. There are some big changes ahead. I've just been informed that I'm not actually sharing my screen, so I'm still not there. 2 seconds. Oh, you are in the hands of a professional, everybody. And I volunteered to do the technology side of things. There we go. This should work. And if it doesn't, you're stuck with my face. There we go. Can we all see it now? Can I get a nod from the panel?
Perfect.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, so here we go. This isn't a fresh start. It does make amendments to existing legislation, and some of those amendments are very big. It is the product of a long process that's gone ahead. We've had experts from across the sector giving their impression of the current system, the problems of the current system, providing recommendations. And the bill that we've got now is sort of derived from a lot of that. So there's bits that we were expecting, bits that we weren't expecting, and bits that maybe we're not fully in agreement with. But as Robin said, on the whole, this is a really positive step forward for homelessness. So the bill itself is split into 3 sections. I'll just be covering 2 of them today, you'll be glad to know. The first section is around homelessness. This is by far the largest section and the area where we'll see the greatest number of changes potentially. The second section then relates to social housing allocation, where we see a couple of changes, some of them positive, some of them less positive. And I won't be talking about part 3, which is what I like to call the legally bit, even though it's all legal, but this sort of explains how the bill should be working with other pieces of legislation and makes those changes that are relevant. So yeah, we can't squeeze that into 10 minutes, I promise you. But as I've said, the part 1 of this bill is by far the biggest section, and it relates to homelessness, so that the help that someone should be provided by a local authority at the point that they are at risk of homelessness or when they have become homeless or are homeless. We've tried to theme these because a lot of these measures are quite wide-ranging and spread across the first part of the legislation. And the first one that I'm going to focus on is really around prevention. So when the Housing Wales Act was introduced, obviously the duty to prevent homelessness was created for local authorities. To line up with sort of Rented Homes Wales Act and that 6 months notice period for no-fault eviction notices, what we can see is there's a need here, or a duty here under this bill, for local authorities to support someone when they are at risk of homelessness within 6 months. So rather than the 56 days that we see currently, there's a 6-month period in which they should be getting the help to prevent them from becoming homeless in the first place. A big part of this will be assisting people to retain the accommodation that they're in, as long as it's suitable accommodation. Now, on top of that, the prevention element sort of recognises the fact that homelessness doesn't exist in a bubble. The housing emergency is far-reaching, and the effects of homelessness mean that different sectors of the public sector are touched by people who are at risk of homelessness or who are homeless. And so reflecting an ask and act duty into this legislation asks for certain public sector bodies to have professional curiosity to ask someone the questions when they may well be facing housing difficulties, and then to act on that by making a referral to the local authority. This sort of recognises the fact that other people are involved in the homelessness process and have a responsibility to help people. Now, of course, without resources, this is incredibly difficult, but I'm going to leave the resource issues to other people to talk about later on. And we also have reforms affecting prison leavers, various changes in relation to prison leavers and local connection, etc. But the idea is really that hopefully we're not seeing people being released from prison into rough sleeping. there's a recognition as well that actually there is a blockage within the current system. The housing emergency, meaning that there aren't affordable properties to move people onto, there's not suitable accommodation, there's not enough social housing. I won't carry on banging on about it. But there are sort of steps within this bill that should hopefully in the future, or could hopefully in the future, ease that kind of flow and see people moving through the homelessness system more swiftly. Part of that is this power for local authorities to request an allocation of accommodation by RSL partners. On top of that, with sort of ending, getting rid of the Section 73 duty, there are additional ways that people can lose their Section 75 duty, which is obviously a concern, because without the proper guidance, there are risks to the person, there are risks to the local authorities as well in making decisions that are not in keeping with the trauma-informed, person-centred approach that this bill seems to be sort of focused on. On top of that, we have expanded rights of review, recognising the fact that people should be able to challenge when things are done wrong. It demonstrates that you know, we need people to be able to ask for things to be looked at again, and to have the right to do that built into the legislation. A big part of sort of that expanded rights of review is that people will be able to sort of to step up, say that something's not right, and hopefully get a solution that is in keeping with that trauma-informed approach. Now, there's elements of support built in. So a lot of the support elements, you know, prevention is a key driver of this, but people should be able to expect a certain level of support as a result of the help that they're receiving from local authorities. And a big part of this is going to be the prevention support and allocation plans. Now, these are like the personal housing plans, but on a bigger scale, on a broader scale. They will be a requirement for people. And what they will do is they'll set out the needs and the suitability issues that are facing particular households. These prevention support and allocation plans are not supposed to be done sort of and forgotten about. There is an intention that these plans should be reviewed periodically and adapt with that person's changing circumstances as they go through the homelessness process. The wider public sector duty that I've mentioned already with regards to ask and act certainly has elements that need to that recognise the need for cooperation as well. If we're going to have sustainable housing solutions, then often it's not enough just to be providing a roof. Often there are additional services and additional organisations that need to be involved to make that a sustainable solution for applicants. And we see as well within the bill additional measures which are intended to support care leavers. So seeing that actually when care leavers are having to make homelessness applications in order to be provided with suitable accommodation, this is not a great solution currently. So we will see, hopefully, additional measures that will see care leavers not needing to go through the homelessness process when leaving care to be provided with suitable accommodation. And then finally, around homelessness, I think these are probably the big issues that we're facing. And that will be the positive, I think, and Shelter Cymru certainly thinks, abolition of the intentionality test and the priority need test. If we are to have a truly person-centred, trauma-informed approach to helping those people who are homeless, then having exclusionary measures in place like these two tests is not sort of, it doesn't marry up with that very well. Of course, I'm very sad to see that local connection has been retained, but there is an abuse exemption. So people who are fleeing abuse will still be able to make applications to authorities where they might not have a local connection. And we also see the introduction of a failure to cooperate test. This is sort of strengthening the unreasonable failure to cooperate with local authorities. And we see it moving into the realms of local authorities being able to end duties because of unreasonable behaviour towards them and towards officers. Now, with these changes to the legal tests, there are risks. And again, I'm going to say it, the guidance is so important. We need clear guidance on how how local authorities should be interpreting the removal of these tests and the continued inclusion of the tests, and particularly where it could lead to someone losing their support from the local authority. So yeah, that will be your part one in brief whistle-stop tour, as I promised. Just one slide on social housing allocations, you might be pleased to hear. The social housing allocations covered by part two in the legislation. I'll start with the positives. I'll start with the requirement for common housing registers and accessible housing registers across the board. So what we're seeing here is we're looking at sort of every local authority kind of operating in a consistent manner in relation to people who need to access social housing or who are applying for social housing from the local authority. The thing that we are concerned about would be around the ability of local authorities to create a qualifying persons criteria. We feel strongly, I feel strongly, that a person knows better whether they should be applying for social housing rather than sort of being told that they shouldn't be. I also feel that perhaps the criteria around what makes a qualifying person, we need clear guidance on how to set that criteria as broadly as possible so that we don't end up pushing people away from a solution, a housing solution that actually would be best for them. There's also an introduction of a new test around deliberate manipulation, whereby someone who is potentially gaming the system to access social housing would be banned from being able to access the housing register. Again, concerns on this would be around sort of the proper guidance of what this means. What does deliberate manipulation actually look like in practice? And hopefully there'd be the option for review associated with it as well. And there you have it. That was your whistle-stop tour of the first two parts of the legislation. I hope you can see how broad-ranging it is and how many moments there are for potential learning in the future. And I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't just mention that if you had any training inquiries, you can absolutely email training@sheltercymru.org.uk. Diolch.
Thanks, Mark. That was really useful and I think emphasizes how much there is in this legislation, simply by how hard it is to get through it quickly. You've clearly done because you've had no questions come through yet, but we'll see if that changes. I think I'm just going to go across to Lauren from our policy team then next to pick up from there.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mark. And I get the sense that there's some concerns about the bill that are maybe kind of rooted in how complicated our system currently is, that we've got local connection tests in different areas. We talk about priority need when it comes to homelessness, kind of support, entitlement, interim accommodation, and then our prioritization when it comes to allocations and bandings. And so, yeah, thank you, Mark, for kind of pulling apart where that all lands. I'm just going to run through, without slides, sorry, you have to look at my face, for hopefully quite quick points from a Shelter Cymru perspective. And just to begin with, really, that there is an awful lot to celebrate here. There's a really clear positive intent behind the bill that we absolutely welcome. Of course, Shelter Cymru as an organisation, our wonderful services colleagues exist to help people access their existing rights within the system, because it is not as simple as rights exist, therefore people are able to access those rights. Unfortunately, there is a little bit more complication to the system than that. So, of course, from a Shelter Cymru perspective, we do have some concerns around the implementation of this legislation and making sure that those rights in policy are also rights in practice, that it's not just a piece of paper, but will actually achieve its aims of changing lives, preventing homelessness, relieving pressures on the system, helping people to live happy, healthy lives in secure, stable homes. There you go. That's all my little, can't remember the word, we used alliteration moments. There we go. Thank you. So the first one of those implementation challenges is really going to be around the resourcing of the changes in the bill. And we certainly Some of you will be aware that Shelter Cymru published a piece of research last autumn where we worked with local authorities to understand the cost of temporary accommodation to local authorities in Wales, and it was nearly £100 million in that 23-24 financial year. So we are concerned about how effectively some of these very positive steps and leans toward preventions, how those will begin to be enacted if local authorities are still stuck working in that crisis mode. How will they free up resources to do that preventative work, which will save them money down the line, but there is likely to be this moment where both sides need some funding. Our friends over at NPT, local authority, the housing and homelessness team there, have done some wonderful work restructuring their team to focus more on their prevention work. But that in and of itself has been a big piece of work. So it's not an overnight change for anybody. And where we are stuck working in this crisis mode that isn't working for people, it's not working for public spending, how can we shift that system? I would suggest we can't do that without a cash influx coming from somewhere, cash injection coming from somewhere whilst we're managing that transition process. The other point along that side, or the other thing to note alongside those implementation challenges, is that the homelessness bill focuses on one specific area of our wider housing and homelessness system. Again, many of you will be aware that Shelter Cymru are one of the partners in the campaign for a legal right to adequate housing here in Wales. Our work at Shelter Cymru is across all tenures, across all demographics, across all ages. 45% of our work last year was families in the PRS, households in the PRS. We see a bigger sort of chunk of work from owner-occupiers than our colleagues in local authorities see. So we really do have that kind of system-wide view. And whilst this bill is taking steps to try and relieve the pressure on that homelessness provision within local authorities without further investment in social homes and those long-term sustainable routes out, it's difficult to see how we can get to the point where homelessness is rare, brief and unrepeated here in Wales. Again, Shelter Cymru published some research a couple of months ago that some of you may have seen, where we worked with local authorities to understand the waitlist for social homes across Wales. It's currently over 94,000 households, which represents 1 in every 14 households here in Wales. Of course, we are not naive at Shelter Cymru. We understand that waitlists for social homes do not tell us about housing need, but they are a really helpful sort of proxy, a really helpful metric to understand, as Mark was saying, those people who are experiencing their own housing insecurities, housing issues, and feel that a social home is the best solution for them. So they are helpful for us. Within that research, then, we looked at the delivery of social homes currently in Wales, and by our figures, it would take 35 years for us to clear that waitlist for social homes as it stood in the summer of 2024 if delivery rates continue. So there's just something to think about there with regards to this bill and our longer term routes to ending homelessness. My next little point is around the timelines the bill sets out. Again, be joining voices across the sector celebrating the abolition of the priority need test and the intentionality test. A little bit concerned, quite concerned, seeing the explanatory memorandum put the date for that as 2030, 2031 at the earliest, tying some conditions to that around relieving pressures for local authorities. We know that these tests are barely used. I was just having a quick check of the figures. So 23, 24, then it's 270 odd instances of people being deemed not to have a priority need and therefore not being able to access homelessness support, 90 households being declared to have made themselves intentionally homeless and then not being able to access help and support. And that's of 34,000 households coming to local authorities for help and support around homelessness. So it really, really is in the minute. So I'm not sure what is blocking those coming in sooner. And I do wonder if it's that how complicated we've made our system. We talk about priority need, and that's not the same as social housing allocations and those prioritisations and banding. So something for us to think about there and how we can bring that in. As Mark was setting out about the deliberate manipulation test that is going to come in with the bill, which will mean that people are unable to access social homes if they are considered to have gamed the system in some way. We've got a massive concern that if that comes in before intentionality is phased out, we have a kind of doubly punitive measure there, which does not reflect the trauma-informed, person-centred approach that really is at the heart of this bill. So again, something to think about there for us. Mark was touching on those different routes that duties can be discharged. A little point from me, it's those bits in section 20 of part 1 that Mark was touching on, where we have a little bit more detail around how we can end duties due to unreasonable behaviour, failure to cooperate type measures. And it's helpful to see some clarity that those are broken down a little bit further. The language and approach there is not reflective of a trauma-informed approach to homelessness at all. We know that people exhibit behaviour that can be challenging or threatening, that people may damage properties because of wider factors, and that our systems aren't yet supporting people adequately. Of course, Shelter Cymru and me personally do not expect anybody to be working in a place where they feel they are at risk or unsafe. The point for us there is that the language within those ending duty powers is maybe needs a little bit of tightening. When we talk about reasonable excuse, special circumstances, there's a lot there that is subjective. It's open to interpretation. So some local authorities might be thinking 2-to-1 support meetings, remote only support, we can do assertive outreach, and some local authorities will be saying we can't resource that, we don't know how to make that work. So we don't want those powers, those ending duty powers, to be kicked in because of resourcing issues. They need to be the absolute last resort for people. Very last little bit from me, apologies, I've probably gone over a little. Don't give me a soapbox, I'll hog it. Is around that ask and act duty that, again, I'm sure a lot of us are really celebrating at its heart and in its ethos. We know that homelessness does not sit within a silo, as Mark was saying. There's so many other factors at play, and actually a system-wide approach to ending homelessness, something that is a lot more holistic and sees people as entire beings, not a series of connected needs, is wonderful to see. I'm sure many of you will be concerned about some of the gaps that are in the list of public bodies that will be held to the ask and act duty, particularly primary care. GPs are massively, they just see a massive number of people. They are that front door service for so many people. We know the link between homelessness and health. People will be going to their GPs for issues where the underlying root cause may be their housing issues, and that needs to be picked up and fed through so that people can be helped adequately. Again, some of you may have seen earlier this month, our friends over at Public Health Wales published some of their survey results, which set out that 80% of survey respondents think that GPs do have a wider role to play outside of our health needs, because people understand those wider determinants of health, those, social economic factors. Again, schools, education settings being missed from that, we think is a real missed opportunity, and we understand Welsh Government feel they have other routes to that. We would question whether the link between the front line, as in the schools and the teachers themselves, and then those local education boards, local education authorities, whether that link will be strong enough, whether those frontline staff will have the understanding they need to feed that information up. But these are all conversations that we will continue to have. Okay, diolch.
Thanks, Laura. That's really useful, and I think once again emphasises how much there is in this bill, and how I feel like we're going to say the word implementation so many times that it's going to lose all meaning over the next 6 months. And I'm sure we'll come back to it as well today. But final bit then before we get into a Q&A, I want to bring Tom in, who obviously working in our housing services team is probably really well placed to tell us his view on what are the big bits in that bill that he expects to see a lot of work coming through in the near future.
Thank you, Robin. And just following on from Mark and Lauren, really, they've covered a lot of the interesting points within this. So I'll speak about how we're expecting to this bill to impact on the work that we see, and likely the work that local authorities are going to see as well in terms of this. As we've all spoken about already, there's a lot more needs clarification in terms of how it's going to be structured and organised. We're still at the very early stage of this, aren't we? It's years until it's going to come into implementation, so it's just giving our immediate thoughts at this stage. Of course, we support this sort of the intent of the bill and what it's striving towards, but of course we do recognise that these significant barriers still do remain in terms of housing in Wales. Predominantly the shortage of available accommodation, the how much it stretches the local authorities themselves, and also the pressures of the private sector at present, which is becoming more and more unaffordable to people. Perhaps if I explain how Shelter Cymru is structured in terms of the casework that we do, that may help explain the work that we expect to see coming through as a result of this bill. When clients come through to us initially, they'll either go to our Shelter Cymru Live service, which picks up inquiries through the advice line, emails, or web chat queries, and they'll either take on some cases themselves, give some advice, or if further work is required, they'll refer it over to our regional advice teams, where we've got caseworkers across all of Wales who will assist with homelessness applications, seeking to prevent evictions in many cases, and then if they go through all of the conversations and reviews and challenges that they can as caseworkers, and court involvement is required, that's at the stage when our caseworkers would refer cases over to us in the legal team, and we take on the cases at that point. So really this bill is looking to impact our frontline caseworkers quite significantly, and it will of course lead on to work for the legal team as well, but I think predominantly the caseworkers are going to see the forefront of it. The first thing that is mentioned within this bill is this fact that prevention is extended to 6 months. Really, in a lot of cases, we see local authorities picking up cases as early as possible because it's just common sense to do so. They pick if someone comes through with a notice, rather than wait until it reaches more of a crisis stage, they give themselves more of an opportunity to liaise with landlords to see if there's any way that can keep them in the accommodation, or if not, and they can determine that early and look to seek alternative accommodation for people. So I don't think that's particularly going to impact too much, because it's what most local authorities do in practice anyway. Where we expect to see most of the increase of work for everyone involved is the further opportunities for review that we see introduced by the bill. Applicants can now request reviews of suitability of accommodation offered in discharge of any duty. So that will now include where they've discharged provided accommodation under Section 68 of the Act. It also introduces, on top of the existing reviews, we can now review where local authority decides not to carry out an assessment by local housing authority of the housing needs of the applicant and any member of the applicant's household, assessment of the local housing authority of the support needed for the applicant and any member of the applicant's household to retain accommodation which is or may become available, or to overcome any barrier to live independently, and the prevention, support and accommodation plan that they put in place. The bill also gives the applicant the opportunity to review referrals to other local authorities. So this is where local connection comes into it. There's actually a right to review these decisions where otherwise we didn't see those, and it was challenging that would be through judicial review. Also extends the time limit for requesting reviews in suitability cases. That's to 6 months. So that's a positive step as well, because often you can't tell within within the 21 days whether accommodation is going to be suitable for you. I mean, in terms of how these additional reviews are going to affect us and local authorities, it is likely to increase the reviews that are undertaken. They're time consuming. They require a lot of hard work and research and legal arguments being made. In practice, across Wales, we have a pretty good relationship with most of the local authorities, and a lot of the time where there is a potential review, we contact the housing options staff and discuss the case, and often the reviews can be avoided. So I'd expect that to continue. However, it's also going to be increasing the number of reviews that are undertaken. So that's going to impact on everyone. As I said, potentially that could it gives rise to reviews and appeals in cases where alternatively judicial review proceedings would be the action to take, where local authorities are failing to take on the work that they should be. As this is generally positive, because it gives our clients more opportunities to raise these issues. But we're going to say this throughout. We're awaiting guidance on what this will entail and the rights for applicants to access accommodation with these reviews, because, as I say, reviews do take a lot of time. Where you're reviewing a decision not to accept an application, for example, at the moment the recourse is through judicial review, and those are dealt with very quickly, and accommodation is often provided pretty immediately, either through agreement by the local authority or through an order from the court. But with reviews, that may not be the case, and it could leave applicants left without accommodation whilst the review is ongoing. So we'd like some guidance on that, and what that would entail going forward. In terms of the Section 9 of the bill, where they abolish priority need and intentional homelessness, really it's as Lauren and Mark mentioned, it's not something we see much anymore. Most local authorities don't really look at priority need. Occasionally, some local authorities will seek to confirm whether an applicant is actually street homeless, and will go out looking for confirmation that they are sleeping rough. But generally, it's not something that is considered, so it shouldn't really impact too much on decisions that are made. Intentional homelessness is, we don't really see it in terms of how the reasons behind people leaving their previous accommodation. It's more, we see intentional homelessness decisions where an applicant's behaviour in temporary accommodation is an issue, and then a decision is made to discharge duty on the basis of that behaviour. And so that is taken away from local authorities in terms of being able to make a decision based on the behaviour of the applicants. We understand that that's going to cause difficulty for the staff involved there. If these the activities of the applicants are criminal, then criminal sanctions will be available to local authorities and housing providers to use in those situations. But yeah, in general, abolishing these is a very positive step forward, and not only in terms of the decision making, in terms of our clients, when they're faced with homelessness, a lot of the time they remain in unsuitable or unaffordable accommodation because they've been told that leaving the accommodation they'll be classed as making themselves intentionally homeless, even if they don't defend a possession claim if there is a potential defence to it, and they don't want to remain in the accommodation. They've been told that potentially they could be making themselves intentionally homeless. So it will ease stress in that respect on people who are looking to move on from where they're living. The introduction of these further circumstances where duty can be ended, and the applicant isn't engaging in violent or threatening behaviour towards the local authority staff or staff at the accommodation. It's, yeah, again, as Mark and Lauren have said, this isn't something that we'd expect local authority staff to have to put up with. But at the same time, we want to ensure that there is proper guidance on this, so that applicants who are experiencing these difficult traumas and I think it's special circumstances are mentioned within the bill, that it's going to need to clarify what is meant by that, and what would be appropriate action to take in these circumstances, because we don't want to leave vulnerable people homeless by virtue of something they've said to staff. And yeah, similar with destroying or seriously damaging property. And yeah, finally, for me, in terms of what we'd be looking at and what would impact us in the work that we do, the placing on the housing register of people who are considered to have tried to manipulate the housing system. So this is going to be an area where I think we'll likely see a lot of disagreements with numerous parties involved. This could be anything. It's essentially intentional homelessness, but perhaps a narrower version of intentional homelessness. But because if you're looking at the reasons why someone made themselves homeless, and was it with the intention of seeking social housing, so you wouldn't expect that to include antisocial behaviour at previous accommodation, because that's just going to be related to the circumstances at that accommodation. That's not going to be with the foresight of trying to gain alternative accommodation. It's more going to be looking at not paying rent or asking a landlord for a notice, which may alert local authorities to implement this section. I mean, at present, we're seeing some local authorities excluding applicants from the housing register by virtue of previous rent arrears, which is something that we consider to be contrary to the legislation in place at present. But whether that's going to continue to be the case under this new section, then, well, remains to be seen. And as we've all said, and we'll continue to say, it's going to require strong guidance from Welsh Government on it. I mean, we've got the current guidance on the Housing Act as it stands is pushing 370 pages. So I expect there to be a lot more reading for us to do and interpretation to make. But it's early days. We don't know what whether it's going to look the same however many years down the line as it is today. So, but those are just our initial views on the bill as it stands. I'll let everyone crack on now. I can see there's a number of questions, so we'll get to answering those, shall we?
Thanks, Tom. The questions are definitely coming in. I feel like some of the ones that were submitted in advance as well, people have handily weaved into their initial bits. So we've sort of answered some questions before we even got to questions. I'm going to start with one, if it's okay, that was pre-submitted, because I think it's interesting. So someone asked if we could explain anything about the powers being given to Welsh ministers. through this bill, and whether that means that some of the changes that we've not seen in the bill, that were perhaps expected from the white paper, if people remember the process, which has been expert review, white paper, legislation, whether that means some changes that were suggested previously might come in at a later date through those Welsh Minister powers. I don't know if anyone has a burning desire to jump in there, or if I should pick on someone, which I can do. Should we start with Lauren then there, and then maybe I
Yeah,
feel
so I was sitting quietly there. I didn't know if Tom wanted to come in from a legal perspective. I definitely, having watched Jane Bryant, CabSec for Housing's oral evidence to the Local Government and Housing Committee, it sounds like that is very much the intention behind some of those additional powers for ministers, where they might be able to bring in further exemptions to local connection tests, where they will be able to define qualifying criteria, like sort of a baseline of qualifying criteria for applications to social housing. We don't yet, as far as I'm aware, have any clarity on the specific ways in which those additional powers might be used. My understanding, and Tom, correct me here from a legal perspective, is that these sorts of powers are quite run-of-the-mill, relatively unobjectionable, and it would just enable the legislation to be reactive is too strong a word, because nothing is quick when it comes to legislation, is it? But to have a certain level of reactivity and learn and develop and grow, particularly when we think about other partners that are involved or those new criteria.
Yes, sorry, we see it. Those powers are there to some extent in the legislation as it stands at the moment. So it's not something that's going to be revolutionary, really.
Excellent, I think, yeah, and always nice to have some of the campaigners among us to keep lobbying on and keep us in work even when the changes go through, which is nice. I'm going to jump across to one of the questions that's been asked today, mainly because it was asked in Welsh and then Heather's translated it, and that moves it into a different place, and I don't want to forget about it. So we've been asked about with Section 75 duty, there's a worry that people who've declined accommodation because they can't take their pets with them might have their duty removed in the absence of clear guidelines. I guess there's a question whether we think that will happen, and then what we think of the changes to Section 75 in general, and if there's anything that we are specifically going to campaign on. I suspect the campaigning point might be one for another day, because we've got to get through the first bit of the legislation, then decide that. But does anyone want to jump in there on that question? Hopefully you can all see it as well.
So there's greater rights of review here. Accept an allocation where they haven't been able to take their pets and they want to make a clear case for why that allocation was therefore unsuitable. They have a longer window in which to do that. I will defer to Tom on my understanding is that Shelter Cymru advice would be to accept and to challenge, and I think that's going to end up staying consistent with the new bill. But yeah, sorry, Tom.
Yeah, you're absolutely. Unfortunately nothing further has been brought in respect of pets. It's going to be considered on a case-by-case basis as to whether the accommodation should be classed as suitable for that person. There's any number of reasons why people do need their pets with them in certain circumstances, so that will be a case-by-case basis. As you mentioned, Lauren, there's a greater rights to review now. There's more opportunities for them to do so at different stages. So there's the opportunity for them to bring up anything that they would like to in respect of keeping their pets.
And Derry, I can see it was Derry from Dogs Trust who submitted the question. Apologies if you wanted to be anonymous. An interesting one for you all, something Mark and I were chatting about the other day, is the kind of strengthening of the language around protection of prisoners' property. And there's been an ongoing conversation around whether or not pets are classified as property, because in some instances they seem to be, in some they don't seem to be. So yeah, that might be a Dogs Trust campaign arc rather than a Shelter Cymru campaign arc.
That's great. Mark, I don't know if you had anything else.
Not at all. They're doing a brilliant job. Carry on, kids.
Since we've mentioned prisoners there and prisons, though, I think we had quite a few questions come in advance about what some of the changes to the legislation might mean for people entering custody or exiting custody, so at both ends. I'm just going to try and group all of those into one really simple question and see if anyone wants to give us the headlines of what is going on in this legislation that might be relevant to people working with people going into or out of prison. Mark, do you want to start there? So I think you skipped the first. Feel free to.
I mean, I think the sort of it seems like it's been enhanced, but it's not. It's more just a strengthening of the language around protection of property, and the kind of the really severe impact that people losing their belongings and then coming out to nothing. Sort of recognizing that that's an issue and that being sort of built in, strengthened within this legislation, I think that's a really positive aspect. And that's the one that I'll focus on, and I'll leave the rest for the rest of you.
Yeah. And I'll add there as well, actually, because I know obviously Shelter Cymru was part of the expert review panel, and I believe that it was from the lived experience engagement that some of those issues around property were really strongly raised. So it's nice to see legislation responding to the voice of lived experience, which is something I think we always support. Tom, Lauren, anything else to add on prisons?
Yeah, so people will have seen the kind of tweaks to local connection test and prisoners, what I am very unofficially calling the no takesies backsies clause, where if a local authority accepts the duty for a prisoner, they have a 2-week period in which to kind of overturn that decision if they felt it was made incorrectly. And hopefully that will just give prison leavers a lot more stability. Our conversations with so Shelter Cymru run a Prison Link Cymru service in North Wales, and the conversations we have with colleagues there around those kind of big battles is the wrong word, but kind of back and forth referrals between local authorities coming up to somebody's release date and then following just leaves people in such uncertainty in a period where they kind of might want to hit the ground running and find some stability. The list of public bodies that are held to the Ask and Act duty and the duty to cooperate, for those of you that are in criminal justice, prison, probation roles, worth having a look at the bill itself, because there is there's a good few within that relate to prison, secure estates, probation, young offender, educational institutions, all these sorts of things. So hopefully that will see a positive impact in terms of bringing that wider system into play rather than things staying as just a housing issue. Anything to add, Tom?
No.
Excellent. That's what we like. Nice and easy. Since we did prisons, perhaps a next one would be to look at another specific group here. So care experienced people and care leavers is something that gets quite a few mentions in the bill. And someone has asked very sensibly, are there any significant changes we need to be aware of in advising young people who are care leavers on this? I don't know if anyone wants to jump in there.
I mean, with this, correct me if I'm wrong here, but it looks to me as that there's a more sort of focused response to dealing with care leavers, and it's taken it away from the homelessness side of things, and social services are going to have the duty for ensuring that the accommodation is available for them, which is very positive. As we've mentioned, it's involving people that are going to be more attuned to what these people, what these care leavers need, and what sort of accommodation is going to be suitable for them. And there's a question of what do we mean by priority for care leavers? Is this Band-Aid plus? I don't think it's a question of banding. It's more just that people are the relevant authorities are going to be involved and ensuring that these care leavers get the accommodation that is most suitable for them.
Yeah, great, thanks, Tom. Yeah, I mean, I would add there, I think that my reading of the bill, a lot of it is there's some good clarification here around care leavers not having to rely on the homelessness system, and ensuring they're getting support in advance, which is welcome, I would say. So we've got a question that's just come in on clarifying changes in the 56-day duty. I'm going to say that feels like a relatively straightforward question, so perhaps it's a good one to take. Mark, Tom, Lauren, anyone want to take us through some of that?
I'll take simple. I'm all over it. Currently, if someone is threatened with homelessness within 56 days, the prevention duty is triggered. 56 days isn't very long, but it matched up with the old Section 21 procedure where someone was losing their property as a result of a no-fault eviction. So it's just been extended, and it kind of matches up now with the no-fault eviction process that we have under the Renting Homes Wales Act, whereby someone gets a 6-month notice period. So at the point that they receive that notice, that would put them in the category of people that should be owed the prevention duty. Now, of course, local authorities can work with people earlier than that. This is not sort of a limit that you can only work with people once they get to 6 months. But of course, things happen. But yeah, so 6 months, if they're at risk of homelessness within 6 months, the duty to prevent is triggered. And sort of the main focus around prevention will be helping people to retain the accommodation as much as possible if it's suitable accommodation.
Thanks, Mark. I was going to say, does Lauren want to come in on implementing that?
Yeah, I was going to say, literally was going to say with my cynical implementation hat on. As Mark said, the 56-day duty is kind of the point at which local authorities sort of have to kick in support. But we know there's local authorities that since Renting Homes Wales came into force, they've been working to a 6-month prevention duty already. So I would love to have some transparent conversations with local authority housing teams over that haven't been doing that about why and what's going to change. Because actually, if they've been waiting for that 56, now you have to do something. Resourcing that at the 6-month point is going to be a challenge and increase the workload. Similarly on this, as Mark was saying in the slides at the very start, the prevention support, what's the A stand for? The PSAPs, prevention support and accommodation plans. Thank you. That are replacing the personal housing plans still require reasonable steps to be taken from both local authorities and the applicant. There will be some instances where local authorities within that 56-day duty already are having a greater number of reasonable steps for applicants than for the local authority, just as a resource management tool. And I would hate to see that be that response at that 6 to 4 month point until the intention of the legislation is to move us out of crisis mode. And the piece of paper alone can't do that. We need to know how that's practically going to happen.
I think this speaks to that sort of person-centered approach again. Some people are going to need a lot more help than others. Some people can be guided just by the personal support and accommodation plan. But, some others are going to need actual practical help from local authority officers. And I think prevention work is sometimes the part of the work that local authorities do, which requires the most attention, it's the most time consuming, it's the most sort of resource intensive. And it's going to be tricky for local authorities, I think, to do this if they're still managing under the current kind of resource model that they've got now. And it's going to be tricky for definite.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mark and Lauren. I think, and as Lauren mentioned earlier, of course, places like NPT having already looked at how to start delivering this support in a very similar style is really useful, because it means that we might have some local authorities to look at to see what is working, what were challenges, and that leads me seamlessly. It's almost like I planned that into the question from Emily Owen, that about we know that legislation is often implemented differently between local authorities. As an organisation working across the whole of Wales, that's something we really do appreciate and have to deal with. So it's a good question. How could we get more consistency through this bill? And perhaps, Mark, I know you lived through the implementation of the Renting Homes Wales Act, so you might have some interesting things to say about having seen how implementation of legislation works in Wales recently.
Yeah, I'm still bearing the scars as well, Mags. I think the key to this is really around clear, strong properly worded guidance. And I know I mentioned guidance a few times, and I know a few of us have mentioned guidance throughout today, but clarity in how something should be interpreted is really, really important. And I mean, I can't tell you how many sort of different providers of housing and local authorities were kind of left feeling that they were kind of missed out from any information in relation to Renting Homes Wales and how it should be applied in practice. And of course, Shelter Cymru stepped up as much as we could with what we thought, but with a lack of an actual code of guidance around it, and because there was no statutory requirement for it, it left a lot of people just wondering what on earth is going on. And that can't be fair for landlords, it can't be fair for housing providers, and it can't be fair for the people who are actually experiencing then the difficulties around it. So I will say that it's great that we've got all of these possibilities for review being brought in. It's positive to some degree that local authorities will be able to sort of manage their homelessness process more clearly or more streamlined. But without that proper full guidance and training, it's going to happen that we're going to see different decisions being made across the board in different ways. So there's elements of consistency being built in around allocations, where everyone should have a common housing register, etc. But then interpreting the other things, the rights of the applicant, or interpreting the rights of the local authority, or how a duty should operate, those are the things that really need clear guidance. And I would really hope that the Welsh Government is going to allow stakeholders to see and view guidance in advance and maybe make recommendations as to how things could be worded in a different way, or in a better way, or a clearer way for people.
Thanks, Mark. Tom, I don't know if you want to come in here as well, as someone who I suspect sees every day the impact of guidance, just leaving that little bit of wiggle room.
That's it, and that's part of what working in law entails. Really, it's seeing that we can find any slight different interpretation of in the wording of things, and yeah, it'd be great if it could be interpreted the same across the board in all local authorities, but in reality that's unlikely to happen. It's going to depend on all number of different factors, but as Mark says, the best way to sort of streamline it down is to get strong, clear guidance in place.
Yeah, and I think, I suppose I would add here as well, you know, cooperation across the sector is always helpful as well. We've got, you know, our resources, whether it's our training team, our policy, our housing services, and we're happy to speak to people and help them with implementation. But I'm sure local authority colleagues and RSL colleagues will also speak to each other, and the more those conversations are joined up, this is a great opportunity to have those and to deliver something really effective. I think maybe there's a question here. I feel like the answer is going to be no, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Ask and act. Do we have any stats to show how this has been working in the English legislation, and anything we can learn from their experience? Because I think the answer to that might be no, and maybe expand it and see if there's anything. We've obviously talked about the ask and act duty already, and about the fact that ministers are getting the power to add public sector bodies. Whether there's anything people think we've missed there that we want to pick up in the importance of these new duties.
I am sort of flip-flopping on ask and act a little bit, as my colleagues here will be aware, on whether the ask element needs to be and should be strengthened. You'll be aware that the ask and act language is being borrowed from the current approach for VAUDASV, like violence against women, domestic abuse, sexual assault and violence. Gosh, sorry, I'm sure I've messed up a letter there. And within that, the ask element is a lot stronger. It's a lot more about like gentle interrogation. And what was submitted, the recommendation from the expert review panel, I believe, was about identify and refer rather than ask and act. So that exploratory investigation mode was incorporated there. My reading of the Ask and Act duty as it stands, it feels a little bit closer to that softer safeguarding duty that I never remember if it's A or B, sorry, this is not my area. But that it is, if you have any concern, you should refer. So that's where I've been flip-flopping with it a little bit, that actually, is there a role for those public sector bodies or public authorities to investigate and refer? Or if we have if we're casting a wider net and they should refer whenever they have a concern, is that going to be more effective? And 4 weeks in, I haven't decided. I feel like my colleagues in Shelter Cymru will probably say actually that more interrogation mode is going to be helpful to really pin down when there are concerns that needs to be raised. And I think if primary care isn't involved, then yes, it does need to be a bit more detailed and a stronger ask duty. But I would be concerned that if we set too many restrictions there, are we then pushing back referrals where it's not appropriate? Is that going to cause the system to break down? All those sorts of things. And so as a mother of small children, I have been on the receiving end of the Valdasvi questions, and it's never been handled well, and I'm not sure how the net catches. So there's again a big implementation question about how we do it effectively and how we support colleagues from other sectors to do that effectively. Soapbox down.
I think sort of what you've really highlighted there, and again, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't mention training. I do think that there is that element. If we're going to be asking for these people who don't have anything to do with housing usually to get involved and do something with it, that there needs to be an element of training. They need to be brought along with this legislation. And that's something that of course, I think needs to be considered, and I would hope gets considered. Training.
Thanks, Mark. I'm going to pick up, again, hopefully this one everyone on the panel can see, but we've had a question from Thomas Lavery about mandating a case coordination approach for people in contact with multiple agencies, which I think is a part of the bill we have welcomed quite strongly. But Tom's saying it looks to him slightly watered down from the white paper. It'd be really good to get a view from anyone there, because there are a lot of places where inevitably this legislation has had to change from the white paper for a variety of reasons.
I would agree, Thomas. I'm working from memory here. I think the expert review panel recommendation was around having like a lead named organisation that wouldn't necessarily be the local authority and housing to lead that case coordination approach, to sort of A, share the load, and B, make sure that the kind of that person's maybe lead need was fronting and bringing others in, and it feels that that's gone. There are some really effective case coordination, cooperation, partnership work setups that some local authorities already have, and the explanatory memorandum references those very different approaches in RCT, where it's a little bit closer to kind of like mapper type meetings for those of you that are aware of those, and then in Cardiff where they've have the multidisciplinary team and people from those wider organisations are seconded into a local authority multi-agency team. I think it's right not to dictate exactly what it should look like for every local authority, but there does kind of need to be a minimum threshold about what would be effective. The local authorities I've spoken to since the bill came out, I thought they'd be much more eager on the duty to cooperate front, and two so far have been very frank. Obviously I wouldn't name them. Two so far have been very frank that they just don't see how it will make any difference, that there are already existing duties, they're already struggling to bring in overstretched colleagues from health and elsewhere, so what difference would this make? So yes, I would agree, Thomas, and it's something for us to have a kind of more fine-toothed comb run through at this end. There we go.
A good opportunity. I'm going to plug some work that isn't Shelter Cymru here as well, if people are thinking about what the differences might be between the draft legislation and the white paper. The work that Jenny Bivings, actually my predecessor at Shelter Cymru, has done for the local government housing committee's inquiry into the bill is excellent for picking that apart and giving you a very clear, very fair assessment of where things have changed and what those changes might mean. So I'd encourage anyone who hasn't seen that to have a look, and I'm sure we can drop a link to it in the follow-up we send out as well. I wonder if this one that's recently come in might be a question for Tom, being nice and specific and about duties. It's about, with the removal of the Section 73 duty, whether it seems like the plan will be to accept a final Section 75 duty once 66 comes to an end.
Yeah, I think so. Is it?
Yeah, I thought I was putting you a bit on the spot there, and it might be to try and remember every little bit of what it said.
Yeah, I think can't accept that.
That's
Yeah,
fine.
yeah, looks to be, doesn't it?
So just running through, I don't think we're obviously going to get to everything today, although we have covered quite a lot of different things. There is a question about, a couple of questions I suppose been asked about Shelter Cymru priorities on the bill, and it feels like something we probably should address. I might bring Lauren in a second, but obviously our immediate priority as an organisation is submitting written and oral evidence to the committee who are reviewing the bill. We've not had it long, and that has been the number one thing we've been trying to get ready for, and we'll be giving oral evidence on Thursday. And I imagine some of the questions that have been asked today will actually help us inform what we say in that, and we say in briefings going forwards. Then the next step for us will be starting to narrow down our areas of interest in the bill, because the reality is every single bit of this bill is of interest to us, but there are certainly some spaces where I think we will be pushing a little bit harder to see if we can make sure things are as watertight as possible. And I know we've mentioned a few of those, but it would come on, unacceptable behaviour and the ending of duties is exactly the type of thing where we will want to be as confident as possible that that's going to impact the minimum number of people possible. Should it go forward, of course, we don't know. Things may come in, they may come out of this bill at this stage. Lauren, as the person who heads up a lot of our other campaigns, is there anything else that jumps out at you could be definitive and say that we're going to spend a lot of time talking about?
I think the social home delivery point will always be front and centre for us. And I think that conversation will carry on even whilst we're discussing the bill, just in terms of the conversations around that timeline of when the measures within the bill are being brought in, the conversation that we've been hearing, by we've been hearing, I mean having sat and watched the Senate TV, CABSEC scrutiny by the committee, is that the measures that will relieve pressure on local authorities will come in before some other measures. And actually, if we're not delivering social homes and secure, suitable, appropriate homes for people to actually move out of the system, then our concerns will increase. So our wider campaigning will continue to be relevant and run alongside this.
That's really helpful. I'm going to move to sort of a chance for anyone to make final comments in 1 second, but there's a question that came from Ryan Jones, just reading back over, about during the consultation there being a suggestion that temporary accommodation for single people would have to be in self-contained properties, including for young people who would only be entitled to shared room rate, the shared room rate in the private sector. Do we have an understanding as to whether this proposal made it through to this stage? I'd also perhaps add a second question to you all here, because one thing that we have certainly raised in our written evidence is some changes to suitability of accommodation to do with hazards, and whether anyone wants to say anything about the proposals there. Don't all jump at once for this one. I can feel you all rereading that question. But
so the bill sets out a 5-year review for temporary accommodation and how suitable temporary accommodation that we're using is. We firmly believe that that is too long a gap. That needs to be something that is much more regular and routine than that. Gosh, correct me here, colleagues. There's nothing within this bill that would set out that about self-contained properties for single persons in TA. So apologies, Ryan, that's probably not a very helpful answer, but it may be a question to take to Welsh Government and the wider legislative process of this.
Yeah. Maybe I could just add on that maybe Mark or Tom could come in on here, because suitability is always a term that feels to me the beauty is in the eye of the beholder on that one. And do you think this is a good the bill process, whether it's guidance or the legislation, this is a good opportunity to look again at what do we mean when we say suitable accommodation?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm picking up on Ryan's point. Accommodation is not going to be suitable if it's not affordable. If they're only receiving the single person rate, yet there's a stipulation that they have to be in self-contained accommodation, potentially at a rate which is not affordable. Sorry, shared if they're receiving the shared accommodation rate. So that would appear to be at odds, but it'd be something that could be clarified in further discussions with them.
That makes sense. So I know we're coming towards the end, and while we've got a lot of questions we could try and get through, I don't want to rush us through the wrong one. So I just wanted to perhaps take the last few minutes to do a quick whip round and see whether there's anything people think we've missed today, or you were expecting people might ask that you had a really, really strong answer to, and you therefore don't want to miss the opportunity to make it, or if there's any other final thoughts and maybe even a key takeaway from everyone on what they're expecting to be doing in the near future with regards to this bill. Mark, do you want to kick us off there?
I will. I'm going to jump in with absolutely something that's not been mentioned at all. And it's around the requirement for local authorities to design policies around lived experience, with lived experience in mind. I think that's one of the particular strengths of this bill, and it's something that I think will make a massive difference. We've already seen one example of how lived experience has changed one of the things that's coming in, and I certainly think that that's something that should be progressed and championed and supported. But yeah, other than that, I've got nothing to round up on. I'll just add another thing in.
No, that's really helpful. Laura, I think Mark set quite a high bar there, finding something that hadn't been mentioned. I don't know if you've got anything, or if it's just a key thought.
I'm worried that mine is a little bit legally. So Tom, do you want to go, and then so I won't accidentally steal it if it's yours?
No, I don't have anything further. Everything I was going to covered in what I was speaking about earlier. In terms of the remaining questions, are we going to answer them separately? We're going to take a note of who's asked them and provide answers to them. But yeah, I mean, as we've mentioned, we're at the very early stages of this. When it comes into implementation, it may look completely different, but it's a starting point, and we've raised a lot of questions ourselves. Helpfully, our attendees today have raised a lot of really good, interesting questions as well, which are things for us to think about and to go back to Welsh Government with as well. So thanks very much to everyone for chiming in.
Yeah. Back to Lauren then.
Yeah, mine was around the various points in the bill where it points to forthcoming guidance that will give us the clarity. And just obviously, a Shelter Cymru are a rights-based organisation, the extent to which rights through guidance are not the same as rights through legislation, and having a due regard to guidance is not the same as local authorities must, public bodies must. So just a word of kind of caution for all of us. Just do we need to have another look at some elements of the bill to make sure that that guidance will be strong enough on those areas? I'm not saying I have a definite answer on that. It's just in the back of my mind. Due regard to is not the same as must.
No, and that's a very good point, and there's a lot of balancing to be done in legislation and in guidance to find the right wording that everyone knows what they meant to do without putting too much pressure on already overstretched local authorities. And I'm going to say this is my final key thought is, throughout this process, we really do recognise that local authorities, RSLs, many others, are already overstretched by the system, and therefore there were inevitably fears about what changes might mean, the disruption, the additional responsibilities. And we recognise that, and one thing that Shelter Cymru will be doing every time we get the opportunity to sit in front of members of the Senedd, in front of Welsh Government, is to reiterate that support is needed for the bodies that are going to have to implement this legislation. We welcome the legislation. We think it could be really positive, but we want to see it implemented well, because our biggest concern are the people. 22,000 people came to us last year for help, and we want to ensure those people get the help that they need, and that is legislation and implementation together, working hand in hand. Final housekeeping points then. As Tom said, there are questions we didn't get to. Because some of them are anonymous, I think what we will try and do is chuck them into a blog or something else on our website with short answers alongside the questions we did answer. And again, when we do a follow-up from this webinar in the next couple of weeks, we can then include the link to the recording, a link to a blog with some of those questions that we didn't get to in, and some links to slides and other material that might be useful. And if we come across anything else we think is useful, we'll make sure to put that in there. Final plug then for our training team, because they are here to be a resource for people. And if you have whether it's now, whether it's when this bill is close to being passed, when it's passed, please feel free to get in touch with the training team at Shelter Cymru if you think we can help you, whether it's because we might have something off the shelf or whether you need bespoke training. We offer that service to fundamentally to help ensure everyone can support individuals and the people of Wales. That's what it's there for, and we encourage people to use it. But that is everything from me. That's a long webinar, and I'm impressed that so many people have stuck with us for so long. So Jolk, and hopefully we will see you all again in more webinars in the future.
Thank you.
Thank
everyone.
you. Yeah.